I came across his work back in 1984. I'm sure you can't imagine either of us is that old. I was doing a series of videos. It was a video course, 26 parts, 13 hours on the definition of Jewish art. And in the last segment, I was talking about directions that Jewish artists were taking, one of them being a whole new range of ritual objects. And Toby's work I became acquainted with and talked about him in that video, except that I'd never met him and thought he was a she. So I referred to she and I referred to her in all my discussion of him, which fortunately, when I eventually met him a few years later, he didn't remember. He remembered that he had been in that, but he didn't remember that I had mistook his gender. And it was really the art that counted. About a year after that, he was part of an exhibition at the Guggenheim Museum in New York, 1985, called New Horizons in American Art. So he was viewed as a handful of up-and-coming artists whom they featured, and certainly that up-and-coming has come up and continued since that time. He's had scores of exhibitions, 40, 50 solo exhibits, and at least 60 museum and group shows, including a few in which I have included him as a curator. So I've kept up with his work, and my keeping up with his work itself is a function of him and my growing knowledge of him. Because what started as an interest in ceremonial objects segued as I realized he's a painter, he's a sculptor, he makes ceremonial objects. You could call him an architect because he designs spaces, take note, sacred spaces, which have a very architectural quality to them. But here's the thing about Toby's work. None of those categories exists by itself in isolation from the other categories. They all overlap and interweave in his work. So his paintings are, and he may tell you about this, painstakingly built, not just with pigment, but with plaster dust, and I don't know what else he puts in it. It creates a very relief sculptural effect, so that his paintings are inherently sculptural. His sculptures are typically painted, and they have a very painterly quality. His ritual objects look like sculptures, and often his sculptures look like ritual objects that you can't quite place. So one of his unique kind of contributions to art is these miniature sacred spaces that he calls shrines, that he gives names that typically don't mean anything to the viewer. It may or may not be a made-up word. It may be a word from Hebrew or from some other language that he's applied, but it's not really a clue as to what it's about. It looks like a shrine, and it's really not, and it is, and it is, and it's not. Or put another way, the sacred and the secular, like painting, sculpture, ritual object, and architecture for him, are all interwoven parts of a very large puzzle. And it's not surprising, then, that he's found his art in all kinds of interesting places. One of these shrines, which isn't so miniature, called Shalev, is in that remarkable community of art called New Harmony, Indiana, which Jane Owen and Robert Lee Blaffer Trust supports and has for years, which brings together works by a range of different kinds of artists, Toby among them. And he's won, of course, numerous awards. He was the outstanding alumnus from Pratt, I think, in the year 2000. And he has an honorary doctorate just from 2007 from the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. And he has been teaching for 3 decades, so that what he does in the field, he also teaches others to do. But that also means he can do what not every artist can, which is to articulate the things that he does, because he's got to in the classroom. So he not only creates art, he's very eminently capable of talking about art. I think his most recent triumph, if I may call it that, is the placement of a beautiful painting of his at the Phillips Collection here in Washington. So your job in the next week is to visit the Phillips, another advertisement, you see, no extra charge, and find that painting, which is situated in a very appropriate manner among 20th century and contemporary works of art. I thought I would start by asking Toby a couple of questions, and then that will segue into his discussing what he's got images of, and in the course of his discussing that, I might pop a few other questions to him, or make comments on things, but I'm going to take a seat next to him now so he doesn't have to twist around, and start by asking why and when you became an artist?
To take classes in flower arranging, which I still love to do today. In high school, I became very interested in photography. I did a lot of photography early on. I knew I wanted to be an artist, but growing up I went to a Jewish parochial school, so they didn't have an art department. So I just did all this on my own. So whatever my grandmother took me to, or my mother took me to, or my grandfather took me to, that's really how I learned. I learned through going to museums. I didn't know what it meant to be an artist, but I knew that's what I wanted to be. You know, and people say, you know, you got your first degree in photography and printmaking and your second degree in painting and sculpture. I always think I just learned how to be an artist. And I don't see myself as a painter or a sculptor or a ceremonial object maker. I certainly do not see myself as a Jewish artist. I'm very proud to be Jewish. I went to 12 years of day school and then studied for 3 years in the seminary. But I'm an artist who is Jewish. I think there's a very big difference. Just like I don't think of myself as a male artist. And that's why Uri, I never was upset that you thought, I mean, you know, I don't care. Gender doesn't, I mean, it interests me, but it doesn't interest me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm very happily married to the writer Nessa Rappaport, but I think art is an amalgam of who you are. And I think if you're a parent, which I am, and I'm very proud of that, and I'm a child of Holocaust survivors, I take that very seriously. I'm named for my uncle, who in 1933 was one of the first 3 people killed by Hitler, not because, you know, he was picked up for being an anti-fascist. He was a medical student and an artist. I don't think it's an accident that I'm so interested in science research, and I do a lot of paintings based on cell formations. So I think what is important is if you grow up so steeped in a culture of Judaism, which I was, I can't separate that knowledge that I have from art history that I know. So when I think of the color blue, which in Hebrew is called tchelet, which is a certain type of blue color that is a Jewish color, like people always talk about Rembrandt green. Well, in the Bible, they talk about this tchelet, which is this beautiful bluish purple, and I use that color a lot in my work. And what's so powerful about it is it's a color that either comes from a fish or from a snail. And when it comes out, the liquid is clear. And as it's affected by the air, it switches from, it goes through all the colors of the spectrum, and it ends on this beautiful bluish, you know, purple color. It's also the color of the Israeli flag, by the way. It's not an accident. And when I started doing sculpture in bronze, I love that if you use farric, which is a type of, you're a sculptor. So, you know, if you do a patina, you heat the farric and you can get like a green or a gold or a brownish, you know, color. And it's not as many colors as this tchelet goes. And I'm very interested in that. When I do any work, I'm going to show you 7 sacred spaces that I've done over the years. Some that are interfaith, one that is a synagogue. I am totally a nonlinear thinker, which means you can interrupt me anytime you want. Don't worry about me losing train of thought, because somehow I've been married to Nessa Rappaport as a writer. She's taught me how to pull it all together at the end. Sometimes it takes a while, but so don't worry. Don't worry if I feel like I'm going off. I'll somehow pull it together at the end. So so if you want to ask a question, don't be shy. I don't believe, I'm a professor at the School of Visual Arts, I don't believe there's a bad question. I think it's maybe not totally thought out, and maybe I'll try and help you add to the question that I think you're trying to ask.
Well, let me ask you another question. Since you already anticipated my next one,
right.
So I guess you've answered the question of the relationship between Judaism and your art,
Right.
which is that there is and there isn't a relationship,
Right.
which is a perfectly
totally
responsible
Talmudic.
Jewish
Right.
answer to a question. Is it a transition, and if so, how did you make the transition, or is there no transition from whatever that is to doing multi-faith, interfaith works that address the spiritual needs and inclinations of diverse groups? Since that's what you do, right? That's what you show us.
Yeah, I'm very interested in artists and people and anyone who takes their own experience and leaves it open enough for anyone to enter. My favorite living artist is James Turrell. I just love James Turrell. I don't know if you know his work. Beautiful works that have to do with light. When I read sacred texts, I have always felt they're metaphors. I don't take them as literal. When it talks about, God creating, people say to me, well, do you believe in the creation of the world? And I'm going, sure I do. And they said, do you actually believe it took 7 days? And I'm going like, definitely not. But I don't think that's a problem. You know what I mean? Like I do believe that it was created. I don't think that a day means a day. I think when you make a sacred space, if you're really thinking about what holiness means, it doesn't matter what faith base you come from. It is a purity of feeling. I'm going to show you, and I'd love you to tell me if you disagree. I'm very open to conversation. I'm going to show you the first piece that I did. The city of La Jolla asked me to do a Holocaust memorial. It's one of these very interesting stories. Originally, they had asked different people to do it, and the art committee was not happy with the choices of the people they picked, and I was like a dark horse that came in very late, and they asked me what I wanted to do, and what I said is I'll show you the space. It was truly not one of the most beautiful spaces I had to work with. Oh, did I go the wrong way? Whoops. I hope I didn't ruin that. Did I ruin that? I pressed the top. Oh, there it is. So I just go there? Yeah.
There you go.
So this was the piece of land I was given. The first thing you have to learn right away as an artist is you always want more space. If you're given this much space, you want more space. I will tell you one caveat to that. Go to the Phillips and see my painting there. It is in such a gorgeous space because it's on a stairwell. There's nothing near there. And it's heaven. So that is a perfect space. But this was not a perfect space. And the first thing I looked at, and I went like,
Are you working with the space
outside
where the pillars are?
I'll come right up here and show you. I'm working with this space. This was the space originally that was given to me, right inside here.
Okay,
so the first thing I said is, can I also have where the pillars are? They wanted to have 6 pillars for the 6 million Jews that died. And I find that so difficult because there were a lot of other people that died. I just didn't want to do that number. I just didn't want to relate to that. So the first thing I did, I got rid of those pillars. We also had a budget to worry about. And I don't know if you've been to Eastern Europe. I have been. I took tours. I lecture, but I also was a tour guide. And you go to many of the places where the death camps were, and you see remainders of what was. And the places that really built up the institutions never worked for me. And what I wanted to do is get stones that look like early Eastern European Jewish cemeteries, which were made with rocks, and they all weren't uniform. So I found rocks that were being... I got truckloads of rocks, basically, that from excavated areas that they were blowing up things to put in roads. So the rocks became very inexpensive. And I took them and I put them all, sometimes they go 6 feet down. I wanted them to look somewhat like tombstones, but I didn't want them to be literal. And remember, I forgot to tell you one other thing when I go back. There is a workout room in 3 of those rooms and kindergarten in the other rooms. And so I knew I couldn't do something that would be very difficult. I wanted people to be able to walk outside. So that's the first thing I did. Then I decided there should be a very natural walkway through there because I wanted people to sit there and start questioning. So and then I really disliked the color of the building. I've always loved granite. So I decided to cover all the walls of the space with granite. And I always try and find people that are generous and that have a reason to want to give. And I found a man that made kitchen countertops who was a child of Holocaust survivors. And I told him, this is going to be a memorial, and would he get me the granite at cost? And so these are all different pieces of kitchen granite, but you'll see what I did with them. So I put in the road, and then I do 2 sculptures. You'll see that. And then in the city of La Jolla, I decided if it's going to be a Holocaust memorial, it should relate to who died, who had relatives in La Jolla that died in the Holocaust. So the most powerful thing was that I wanted it to be open to everyone. I didn't want it to just be Jewish people who lost people in the Holocaust, and I didn't want it to be if you had more money you could get a bigger name or less. So we made a decision that every person who wanted to have their name mentioned or any relative would pay $18. $18. That's what I mean. Like, I can't separate my Jewishness and my regular. 18 means chai, which means life. So I wanted them to pay $18 to get every name. And I went along with Hitler's version of, how, you would be Jewish if your mother, your father. It was all the relatives. And I used that for anyone who had a relative who died in the Holocaust. So if you had a grandfather who died or you had a brother who died, I used the way Hitler decided how to count people as Jews as the way to count them as anyone who lost family. Am I clear? Do you all understand? Yeah. What was so powerful is we had 10,000 names. It was frightening. We put it into the newspapers for a while. These are all people living in La Jolla. And I just want you to see the names. And I then talked to a man who did the tombstones in La Jolla for the cemeteries, and I got him to do it as if he were doing tombstones. So each name is written the way he would have written on the same type of font and the same thing for tombstones. And I don't know if you know Maya Lin's work. I adore her work. I think she's a great, great artist. She did the Vietnam Memorial, and I just wanted a place that everyone's name could be mentioned there. And what's powerful, to this day, people leave flowers on the bottom here. I made their pebbles right in front of here. And I decided I wanted this to be a garden that people would actually sit in. And on each rock, each of these rocks, I don't know if you can see it, I asked people to tell me every place that people were deported from. Because I didn't want to just write Treblinka or Auschwitz or Bergen-Belsen. This is about La Jolla. So I said, I want to know where everyone came from. And this is another artist who I admire greatly, is Christian Boltanski. Did a very powerful piece in Berlin. And I should also tell you, that's what I mean. I don't separate my artistness from my Jewishness. I'm always thinking about how I think an artist is constantly in dialogue with other artists. And I'm very interested in that. So on each of the rocks, it says where they were deported from, what towns they were killed in. And then I wanted a section for righteous people of the world that hid people. I realized when I was doing this garden, I also wanted to have the righteous people of the world that hid people. There were many people that were hidden. And it wasn't one or two in La Jolla. There were dozens of people. So I wanted in the library, which is upstairs on the second floor, you can do research on every name of every person that is there, and their story could be part of it. Yeah?
Where did you put the towns that they were from?
On the different rocks. So certain rocks, it says, the rock will say on the top, deported from, towns from. So as you walk through the garden, if you're in the mood one day to do one thing, you do one thing. If you're not in the mood, you do something else. Then, this was very powerful, and this I really owe my wife, Nessa Rappaport, who's really been my partner in so many of my artistic endeavors. Because it was funded from the city, we were not allowed to write the word Jew in the piece because it was a Holocaust memorial for everyone. And they didn't want it to be specifically for one group. So we wrote the whole history of when Hitler came to power, when he did Kristallnacht, and we put in the whole history without calling into, separating the Jewish element of the Holocaust with the rest of the Holocaust. And there is the piece now, and it's among the proudest. I'm very proud of it because it's the garden. I used bamboo. I used all different things that were perennials that would keep changing. And I'm really happy that kids walk through there and it doesn't freak them out. And, it's a very inclusive, yeah.
What is the building used for?
I'm sorry, it's the JCC in La Jolla, and it's right near the theater. It has the opera for the city of La Jolla. It's public ground that is used for the JCC, and there are many different things in this park. All right, so now this is the next one. Yes?
Were there sculptures?
Sculptures are bronze, and they're, well, I originally wanted this to have a flame in it. I'm very interested in two things, water and flames. So this is a sculpture, and it's very much like a tree or a woman's figure. and it's basically watering the garden. And I'll tell you one or two quick other things that are interesting. You're not allowed to have a flame there because children play there, so I couldn't have what I wanted, which was a flame. Then I decided I wanted water, but you can't have water more than 3 inches high because kids can drown. I mean, I think the parents should be watching them, but that's another aside. So you also can't have any rocks that are not glued down. So I had to sit on the ground and glue down I love pebbles. We had to glue every pebble down. Inside, so there's a little waterway that goes throughout the entire place, and it's just beautiful. But you can't drink the water because it has something in there so that the water keeps moving. And this is like a figure that's beseeching. This is 5 feet tall. This is 8 feet tall.
So even though it's 8 feet up, you still couldn't have flame?
You can't have anything because it's so close to a building. And I tried to get to have... you can't use oil, but I thought I could use gas, but you can't do that either. I mean, there were so many issues. I don't know if you noticed, I got the land all the way up to the edge. And what I did is, you have to have a yellow stripe around where you can park. I love that so much. That it was like a yellow band all around my Holocaust memorial. So the people that didn't know say, oh, doesn't that bother you? And I'm going like, no, perfect. I just love it. So I went all the way to the road and had the yellow, which is really for the parking. But in my mind was that whole idea of separation of holy and the profane.
But I love the way the combination of all those elements.
Yeah.
You've got the grass, the trees, those, as you say, perennial, and then you've got the rocks, but then you've got the sculptures, and then you've got that rectilinear black wall with all those names. It's a real nice...
Yeah. The other thing that was really interesting is I'm very into symbolism, so I wanted an olive tree. Can't have an olive tree because they have pits. So I had to spend the biggest part of my budget on getting this fake olive tree that doesn't have pits, that's a hybrid. I called it an olive tree, but it is not an olive tree. So there's one olive tree that doesn't have pits, and the people that don't know go like, I've never seen pits on there. And I'm going, I spent a fortune to get that tree. That it looks, if you don't know what it is, it looks like an olive tree, but it's not. So that was that piece. So this was the next project. This, I have to say, is the most exciting project I've ever done in my life. I met a woman by the name of Jane Blaffer Owen. Around the same time I met Ori, maybe a few years later, and she saw my work. Her family were the Blaffers. I don't know if you know the Blaffer Museum in Houston. Her family was Exxon and Texaco, major contributors to the art world. They did the Roofless Church with Philip Johnson. She was a big supporter of many...
Jacques Lifshitz did the
gate
for that.
She loved Jacques Lifshitz. In fact, she just died this year, and I spoke at her memorial service. It was very powerful for me. She was one of the greatest people I've ever met in my life, by far. And she understood what it meant to be an artist, and she understood what it meant to be an artist with a family. She was very close to my mother. She was very close to my wife, and she flew in for each of our 3 children's births, baby namings, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs. She always showed up, and she loved art. And right before, for her 95th birthday, she asked me to do another sacred space for her at the Evansville Museum. And I'm so happy that I did it, and I spent a week with her. But she saw this little sculpture in a tiny museum show. So you said you're an artist. Very important to show everywhere. So I showed in a museum in St. Louis called MOCRA, the Museum of Contemporary Religious Art. And one of the biggest supporters in my career is a Jesuit priest by the name of Terry Dempsey. Terry Dempsey founded MOCRA, and he had seen my work in 1981, I think, at a show called Sacred Spaces, and I did these small shrines that Ori was talking about. Jane sees this at the opening show of MOCRA. It's this big, I'm not exaggerating. And she said, boy, that's so beautiful. Somebody, you should do this as a large outdoor sculpture. Now, she looks very modest. She doesn't wear any makeup. She had, gray hair. I mean, you could Google her. She was a very interesting looking woman, but she was not the type of, I didn't look at her and think like, oh, wow, she can spend X amount of money and do this piece. So I said, oh, thank you. That's so sweet of you. Very nice idea. So I sit down at the, at the museum, and Peter Sells, who's the curator who came out, who has curated 4 of my shows, says to me, do you know who that was? And I said, no. She said, Jane. I said, her name is Jane Owen. And he goes, haven't you ever heard of the Blaffer Museum? And I said, of course I have. She goes, well, that is the Blaffer Museum. And I go back to her and I said, oh, Jane, I'm so happy you like it. Well, why don't you come to my studio in New York? So she comes to my studio in New York, and she had her own plane at the time, and she flies me to New Harmony, Indiana. We bring the little sculpture, and this is what I loved about her. And a little bird, a forgot the name, bunting, blue bunting, lands here, and she says to me, this is where we're going to do Shalev. Shalev comes from the Hebrew word shalva, which is peace, and lev is heart. She wanted me to call the piece shalom, and I said, Jane, I'm not calling a piece shalom. I mean, it's so ridiculously literal. And she goes, do whatever you want. You know, so the reason we picked this piece of land was that this is the Wabash River. The Wabash River right here floods once a year. And she owned all the part of the town. Now it's part of the University of Indiana. She bequeathed a lot of this to it. And so we picked it to be here. Then because it was different, I only started doing, this was the first outdoor sculpture that I did. It was 1990, early 90s. I realized in Indiana it freezes, so I had to go 9 feet below ground. So I had to build this whole armature underneath. Then I wanted the stone I wanted to originally use marble, which I'm so happy she told me no. And she wanted the stone to come from America, so she loaned me the plane, and I went to South Dakota. I traveled all over to find the right quarries. I went to South Dakota to find this type of beautiful granite. And then we picked the granite. I cut it in a foundry in Chicago. I worked with something called a diamond-headed, it's a tool. It's like a dentist tool that you work on the small piece. Huh?
It's like a demo.
It's a demo. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And you work on these huge pieces, and I cut all these from the granite. And then, you're going to see all my life. I used to have dark hair. You saw me with gray hair. This is earlier with brown hair still. And this is the bronze that I did in New York. And this is, I was working on at the end after I put it together. And this is right in front of the Wabash River. I'll tell you something at my own expense I'm such a New Yorker. So I fly back and forth many times, and I build these, and I work with some engineers and architects, and they keep telling me, you know, Toby, these aren't straight. And I'm going, of course they're not straight. I don't want them to look straight. So we have to do rods, stainless steel rods in here, and we have to close them on the top. Anyway, in the middle of the night, one night, I freak out because I realize that you're going to see there's a bolt and the rod from the top, and I realized that a lot of people fly, planes, low-flying planes. I thought they would see these bolts, and it would ruin the myth of the whole thing, and that it looks like it was there. I put granite stones everywhere around here, so it would, even though there's no granite in Indiana, I wanted it to feel like I found this there. I wake up and I say to Jane, I got to go back. I have to cut a piece of granite to cover the bolts on the top. Anyway, I fly back, do it. We have a huge opening. She invites a lot of people. I don't know if you know Michael Brenson. A lot of people come to the opening. And all the people who fly those little planes come to the opening because they heard the story that I cared so much about them. And they come there and they say, hey, where are you from? And I said, New York. And they said, oh, that's why. And I'm going like, why what? She goes, do you realize how close to the ground you'd have to be to notice something this big? It's the most ridiculous thing in the world. So I said, oh, so why'd you come? They said, we wanted to see the guy who was so obsessive, compulsive. And we realized he was from New York. So that was the piece. And that's what it looks like when it floods once a year. So you see all the stones that I put all the way around. There are 10 of them. And they're all around. And isn't that amazing? So once a year it floods. And her grandson just sent me the picture. It was just a few months ago. It's always this flood season. And a lot of people get married there, which I'm really proud of. All right, so this is another one. In 2001, the healthcare chaplaincy, Father Walter Smith, again a Jesuit, knew my work as creating sacred spaces, and he said, I want you to do something for all people who are healthcare workers who need a meditative space. So he said, you're the person, you make a space. So I said, well, I'm Jewish, and in a Jewish meditative space, what's the difference between a Jewish meditative space and a synagogue is that it only fits 9 people, because a quorum, you need 10 people to make a service. I said, let me make a space that only fits 9, 3 chairs, and 2 benches that each can fit 3 people. So that's what I made. And again, I told you I love James Turrell. This was not on the top floor of a building, and he told me I can't cut a hole in the ceiling. So I did 3 different types of lighting with tungsten light, daylight. Well, you have something interesting here. I mean, I would have curved the ceiling, but I like that there's not one type of light here. So I have 3 different types of lighting fixtures, and I curved the top. I lost 2 extra feet because I wanted the top to look like a opening that doesn't feel enclosed. And I also wanted doors that have ambient light. If you don't want any light at all, you can close these like Japanese type doors, screens, and you're in there with no light at all. Also, it's my favorite.
You also talk about the backs of your chairs?
So the backs of the chairs. So I also make furniture. I also worked with set designs. I did things for Joe Papp at the Public Theater. I worked with Elizabeth Swados. I worked with Muna Chang. I've also done a lot of, before I was married, I didn't have to make a real living. So I did a lot of stuff for theater, which I loved. And I got very interested in something called theatrical leather. When you use theatrical leather, you can keep, you can sit on a chair and you sit in the leather, and the leather keeps your shape for quite a while after you get up. So conceptually, I wanted the chairs to use that hand-dyed, I dyed the leather, and there's a foam inside, so when you sit in the chair, your body, the chair keeps the shape of your body for 5 minutes after you leave. So conceptually, if it's a meditative space, until you left the room, you're still there. And I've always made many chairs. You'll see some of the baby naming chairs that I made. I wanted the chairs to be lower. This is all made out of poplar wood. And I wanted the chairs to be lower than the horizon. So when you look across, when you're sitting in these chairs, your eye goes above the horizon line. And the chair has an image, a symbol that I've used many times. I told you I'm very interested in science. Well, does that look like anything to anyone? I'm curious, since you're all being so nice and watching. Does that remind you of anything? I'll tell you what it's based on afterwards. Does it look like anything? Yeah.
Rotation of the planet?
Rotation of the planet, that's one thing. Anything else? All right, so my best friend is a scientist who was at NIH for many years and now is the dean at Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia. And he got me very interested in looking at electron microscopy, images from cell formations. And this is what cells look like when they split. It also is interesting to me because I'm very interested in this whole idea of God and man, or God and woman, or God and mankind, and that whole idea of an embrace of a circular shape. So I wanted this piece. I think of cells as the beginning of life, and I also love that idea of, an enclosure, that you have this type of figure that's engulfing the whole piece. And I wanted all the chairs to have the same image on the back of this, peaceful, meditative, quiet creation feeling.
Wait, and the space beyond, you use the word horizon because that's actually a kind of triptych, is it not?
Right, yeah.
So that's a painting.
Forgot that. Oh, this painting in the background. I was
Yes.
talking about on the chair.
No,
I'm sorry.
no, I know the chair,
paintings in
but
the
now-
background.
now the
Whoops, let me
background.
give you that. So the paintings, I've done many paintings called sky and water paintings. And I love sky and water. So I do triptychs. I love the number 3 in Judaism, the number 3 in Christianity. In every culture, 3 is an important word. In Judaism, it's ha'olam hamed al shlosha devarim, that the world stands on 3 things. And so I very often break my panels into 3s. I could have made it as one painting. I love doing the 3s. On the sides, I put mountains because one of my friends, a woman rabbi named Rachel Cowan, told me that, and she does a lot of healing projects, that it's important to have something to focus on sometimes. So I love having nothing. But on the 2 side walls, I did 2 mountains on one side and 1 mountain on the other side. So it's 3 times 3, it's again 9. So you'll see in all my work, I'm very interested in using images and numbers. Father Smith wanted me to do something with a New Testament, a Hebrew Bible, and a Quran, and I said I don't want to have, if it's a meditative space, I want no books in this space. So usually my chairs have things on the bottom. I left a place to have every type of holy book outside the space, and if you want to go into the space with it, it's your choice, but then you have to keep it on your lap. It's not about, I want you to really be meditating in there. So this is a piece that I did at the Albright Knox Museum and the Neuberger Museum. Yeah.
Could we just back up? Where was yours?
This is still in New York at 315 East 62nd Street. I'm very proud. It's on the 4th floor. New York, not New York, Art News or Art in America picked it as one of the, in 2003, as one of the top 10 public spaces. It's now, I'm doing the whole building. It's the biggest project of my career. I'm doing a whole building downtown New York for an end-of-life space where I'll be doing all the rooms and 16-story building. This will be moved there as well.
So can we go and see that?
You may go there. It's open to the public. 315 East 62nd, 4th floor. They're very nice. People go there all the time. I'm very happy to say people sit there and meditate. And it's a public space. So this comes from, I don't know if you know, a wonderful curator, Dee Dee Young, was a curator who knew my work for years, and I had done a show a few years earlier at the Albright Knox of just sky and water paintings, and she had this 80-foot long painting, 80-foot long wall, and she said, do what you want on there. And it was like a fantasy. And again, as I told you, I love sky and water. I think sky and water is very meditative and very holy, and I wanted to do something with just like a scrapbook based on memories of what sky and water are. The idea came to me when I was 18. A lot of my family lived in England. I went to the Tate and saw the Turners. And the Turners, I'll never forget it. It was all watercolors and small oil paintings of his small paintings of ships in water. And I then told my then girlfriend, one day I want to do a piece like that. And this is really my version of what Turner had done there with his work, but I wanted to do something that was very minimal. This is Jane's piece, and this is now in Indiana. She had said to me she wanted me to do a sky and water that made her feel like she was at the beach, because in Indiana you don't have a lot of that. So that's a 45-foot long painting of that. And these are all other, these are like 9 or 10 feet long.
Toby?
Yeah.
It's like you filtered Turner through the chromaticists, through Newman and Gottlieb and Rothko, but you're almost the opposite of them. They suffuse the canvas sometimes without even priming it,
right,
and it soaks in. Could you talk a little bit about your technique? Because you're the opposite.
Right.
You build up and build up and build up to get this scintillating quality.
Well, I got my first degree in photography, and if you ever work in a darkroom, it's fascinating to watch the image. Well, now people do everything on a computer, but it used to be that you worked in a darkroom and you'd see the image come up. And I am very interested in images that feel a resonance, that the longer you look at it, the more you get from it. So there may be 20 layers of paint, much more. The underpaintings, I use something called modeling paste, which has marble dust in there. There are many layers before I even think about color. I studied with a lot of Albers' students. I'm fascinated with color theory. So the underpaintings are all white. Then I work with colors that are opaque. I work with an opaque base. And then I switch to translucent glazes and washes. So when you get close to any of my paintings, you'll notice that it's not a specific color. I don't like color that, I like him as an artist. I wouldn't want to make works like Ellsworth Kelly. It's too flat for me. I do think, if you'd ask me what is the most Jewish thing about me, it's not the work I do, it's the way I think. I love that back and forth thing. I feel like my brain is always a ping pong ball, and I'm just going back and forth. And I like a surface. Even if you see it in here, you can see that blue is not a pure blue. And I want that very badly. I want that image to work off each other. Is that fair? Yeah. So this was, these are Shalom Bach chairs. This is from a show I just did at the museum in New York, the Mobia.
And some of these were here at Georgetown.
Some of these were here at Georgetown.
Part of Avodah.
Yeah, right. Part of the Avodah a few years ago, right? You had the
Yes.
first version of them.
Yes.
So this was only done, I think, 5 years ago. So I had originally done the baby naming chairs that was at Georgetown, which were the ones that my daughters. So in Judaism, you have a circumcision for boys, and for girls, there's a party. And I just didn't work well for me, and it certainly didn't work well for my wife, who's a very outspoken feminist. I think I'm an equalist. I totally believe that you should relate to every person for what they are and who they are. So for our daughters, I told my wife I was going to do a baby naming chair for our son, and she said, if you're doing something for our son, what are you doing for our daughters? And I go, ooh, I never thought of that. So in 1985, right after we got married, during her pregnancy with our first child, we didn't know what we were having. And I love this, that people sometimes say, oh, did you think you were having girls first? And I'm going like, no, but I didn't know what I was having. So we made a baby naming chair for our son and these baby naming chairs for our daughters. I did those, and for our son, I did one chair. And for our daughter, who I thought would be our daughter, she came 4 years later, I did 3 chairs. And I lecture at the Met regularly also, and I really like African art, and I like symbolism, and I thought again for the number 3, as I told you, I like that 3 very much. I didn't want to do 1 because I didn't want to mimic what we were doing for our son. And I did these 3 paintings that were one landscape, and I always have loved Steinbeck's Of Grapes of Wrath, and it talks about men are like mountains and women are like water, so the paintings were based on water and mountains. I was very, yeah, come on in. All right. So I did those chairs, and the show traveled for 10 years, and I didn't have the chairs for quite a while. And my mother died 7 years ago, and during that year that she died, I decided I was saying Kaddish, which is a ceremony that you say for somebody who dies, and it didn't work for me at all. So I decided to do 11 projects in her memory for each month of the saying Kaddish. And the 11th project was to do a new set of baby naming chairs because somebody wanted me to do a set that could be used by everyone. And then I thought, why not do 4 chairs and do it based on the mothers in the Bible? I'm very interested in Renee McIntosh and Frank Lloyd Wright, and I wanted the chairs to feel very much like they were thrones. I wanted them, there's a saying, Boneh Bayit Ne'eman B'Yisrael, that when you have a child, you build a house, so you don't need these structures on the bottom. You saw the chairs that I made for the healthcare chaplaincy, very different. Here I made a little, like a house inside, and conceptually, like most chairs, the front of chairs and the backs of chairs are on the same visual plane. Do you see this? I'll just give you a demo. The front chairs and the back chairs. You see the legs in the front and the back are the same? So if you conceptually fold it. Now, no one's going to fold these chairs. They're huge. But I wanted the front legs and the back legs, so in case you conceptually close them, they wouldn't touch each other. So it's a metaphor for life that I believe when a child comes into the life, he or she should take their past with them, but it shouldn't be a burden. You know, it should be about growing. Then I decided I had to do images that were based on the Ima'ot, the 4 mothers. Now, I'm not a literal artist, and I'm not interested in being one. So I started doing research on what were the attributes of these 4 women, and I started doing images that relate to what they are. I'm not going to tell you which each one is because I want you, that's part of the fun of it. But some are more obviously sensual looking. I mean, some, people say, is that a woman's body with a, yeah, hello. But I want them to have more of a abstraction to them. So they all are based on quite a bit of studying I did of different attributes of the different 4 mothers. On the backs of the chairs, it's in gold. And I want, and it's been used by quite a few people, that the names of the girls that were born will have their name and their parents' name on the backs of the chairs. So it's a piece that will constantly be used. So on the backs of the chairs is all painted gold, and there you can write the name of every child that was using this sacred space. All right. So now we're coming to an Omer counter. I don't know if you know what that is. An Omer counter is very much like an advent calendar. This was at the museum also. This is 6 feet tall. The idea is, in my mind, it's a conceptual piece. It's based on going from slavery to redemption. I believe everyone is going.
Would you just explain what the Omer counting is?
I'm going to give you mine, and then I'm giving you what the historical one is. In my mind, it's the idea that we all are going from. We all have our own issues, and we all have to find a way to let them go. The way it comes to in history, an Omer counter is, it starts from the 2nd day of Passover until Shavuot is from when we got the Bible, and it's 49 days, 7 times 7. I love the numerology in there also. And it's when a lot of terrible things happen to Jews over historical times. And I don't know if you know, Ansel Kiefer is obsessed with it. Madonna is obsessed. A lot of people are obsessed with this whole idea of Omer, counting the Omer. But I wanted to do it, again, in the idea of individuals in society, that I think we are interesting people, or these are 49 individual sculptures that go only in one direction into the sculpture. By the way, if you go to the museum, the Minneapolis Museum of Art owns one, the Jewish Museum owns one, Museum in Israel owns one, and then I've made editions of 7. I've done 2 times editions of 7, plus the original that the Jewish Museum owns. And I love the idea that it's using refracted and reflected light. so that each piece looks better because it has a piece next to it. So I'm very interested in this idea of how we are individuals, we're interesting individuals, but we become much more interesting by who is next to us. In other words, I always tell my students there's no such thing as a tall person or a short person. It's only in relationship to something else. There's no such thing as a skinny person or a fat person. It's all about where you see yourself. So each sculpture, I love the way the light hits it and it relates to the pieces next to it. The first time it was shown at a community center, and I got the Count from Sesame Street to come down and work with the kids, and it was so much fun. And they're hollow, so they're not so heavy. And I love that the kids would pick them up. We had a vitrine with 7 pieces in there, and every day the Count would come and say, "Oh, what?" And he'd do the whole thing. It was very wonderful. There's a very nice, on YouTube, if you go to Toby Kahn Mobia, you'll see how it looks like to put each piece in and out. Yeah. It's all the wood I use is poplar. Poplar is the softest hardwood around. And the reason I use it is it's not that expensive, and I'm covering it anyway, but it's a very sturdy hardwood.
Do they fit into particular?
They only fit into one direction. That's why I have it empty. And then each piece has a number and an arrow on the back, and that's how you know which each one fits in one way. Very obsessive-compulsive behavior. This was from that last show, and this is I did a memorial chapel. This is an arc that I just did the whole synagogue in the interior. 8 murals, the arc doors, an eternal light. That's the space, and I'm very proud of that. These are 8 feet tall. This is in Minneapolis. Oh, Milwaukee. Sorry, Milwaukee. Minneapolis is the other museum piece. That's there. And this is the last project that, if you go to New York, you're here for 2 more months. It's called Embodied Light. The Education Alliance commissioned me to do a piece in memory of September 11th. I'm very proud of this piece. This is a floor installation. This is made out of thousands of pieces of remaindered wood. And it's the way you would look. As a kid, my dad was in the wine business. We used to go to Windows on the World, and that's how you saw the city from below. So I wanted it in the middle of the gallery space to have a floor piece that looks like the city beckoning it. It also looks like it's covered in ash. Anyone who was walking from downtown New York was covered in ash. So I wanted that to be the central piece. There are 2 charity boxes. These are the same proportions as the World Trade Center buildings, and they're covered in plaques with no names, because there's so many people still dying that I didn't want to have a specific number of plaques for the people who died, because I don't know if you read this, and it was in the Times the other day, that all the firefighters that died, but now almost every firefighter that was down there has cancer and is dying. So I wanted to do something that somehow everyone could be named. I then asked, and Klaus is one of the people that did one of the blocks, I asked 220 New Yorkers. I didn't want the whole installation to just be my work, so I asked 220 people that I really like in New York. And after September 11th, I don't know if you knew, that everyone was friendly with each other. Everyone started talking, what happened to you, where were you? So I made these little blocks, like building blocks, and I asked 220 people to write their narratives of what they remember or what they think about of September 11th. And this is part of the installation. This is at the Education Alliance at 197 East Broadway. But if you don't have time to see it, go to YouTube. And New York One did a piece on it, and the Forward. The Forwards is even better. They're both very good, but you'll see a 7-minute clip of the whole installation. And then this is the way I love the way this came out. This is the floor piece. There are 12. Again, the number 12, based on the 12 tribes. There are 12 pieces on the floor here. And then you get to, these are 7 memorial lights. And I wanted to do 7 memorial lights, again, for the 7 days of the week. Maya Benton is a beautiful book. And if you go to the Education Alliance, you can get it for free. There are 3 essays in this catalog. Maya Benton, Norman Kleeblatt, who's the senior curator at the Jewish Museum, and James Young. I don't know if you know James Young. He wrote the book on monuments. So I wanted there to be 7 memorial lights. So let me tell you about each of the 7. So this and this were 2 memorial lights that I had done in the past. The middle one was done for the Holocaust or Darfur. I've been asked by many people to make memorial lights for different occasions, so I wanted to do a memorial light. This is like a pyramid. It takes a community to build a pyramid, so I wanted to do one of the memorial lights to have a pyramid piece in here. So if you take this, you see that it looks like a pyramid here? A pyramid has to be built by a community. And I wanted the central piece for this whole piece to be like a community memorial light. So those are the three in the back. This is for somebody who has a full life. This is somebody like on the wings of angels. They look like angel wings. These are all cast in bronze. And I always use lights that have, I forgot what it's called, candles that have paraffin. Because paraffin, which is very different than beeswax, which another artist who I love who uses beeswax, but I don't like using beeswax for my work. I like paraffin because paraffin goes from solid to liquid to air. So in the beginning, it looks like it's white paraffin, and then it goes to liquid, and then it goes to air. So all the pieces are with these glasses in there. So the first one I decided to do for this project was like, it's called a Shiva stool, when you sit very low when you're mourning. And I made this like a lower version of this. Do you see how different that looks? And it's the idea of, these are all people who died so tragically way before their time. The second one, there was a family that commissioned me. They knew I create meditative spaces, and I'm very interested in making memorial lights. Right after September 11th, the family called me up and said, would you make a memorial light for our family? Because we lost somebody down there. And I said, definitely. But I said, one day I want to cast it and make it a larger edition. And they said, whatever you want. So this one has 2 slits in it, and they have holes in the side. And when you see the light with all the lights off, you see 2 lights going up. So it's like the Twin Towers. This one, a collector of mine, right after my mom died 7 years ago, she called me up and said, are you doing a memorial light for your mother? And I said, no, I'm doing 11 projects in her memory. She goes, it's like the story of the shoemaker's children. You should really do a memorial light for your mother. And I said, I'll do one, but I don't know what I'm going to do with it. And so I did it, and I've used it in my house for 7 years. And I decided, once I decided to do these, I'm going to cast this in here also. So this was never cast. I did it 7 years ago. But it's very much like a bridge, because my mother was very interested in this idea of this world and the world to come. So I made that one. And this, I wanted to somehow relate to this piece. So this I just finished. I'm from a KAHN family, which is a priestly family. And the sign that you make to bless the people is this sign. So I wanted the last one, to have that sign. If you ever see Spock, he was Jewish, and I know when he came up with that, he and I have been on panels together. And he came up with this, the Vulcan sign, because he said, I'm a Kohen too. And I figured, why not? And so that is this. And the shape of this relates to that piece over there. So that's what you see that they look like from up close. These are the memorial blocks. It is so powerful. And if you get the catalog, all 220 blocks are in there. And that's just some close ones. This was done by Father Walter Smith of the Healthcare Chaplaincy. This was done by Philip Lopate. This was done by James Young, which I love also. There's not one that is not really good. Every one of the 220 people are very close friends of mine. I didn't ask anyone I didn't like, because I'm very into karma. I never want to have a project working with somebody I don't get along with. So all these people are people I invited. This is Kevin King, a wonderful artist. He told me a story that I'll never forget. He had saved this little piece of paper that flew into his Brooklyn Heights apartment after September 11th. And he made a shrine for that little piece of paper that he had for 10 years. This is the head of the MTA's art department. She did the Guernica piece. This was done by Haskell Luxton, Dee Dee Young. They were all so many. This was very powerful. This was done by a very good friend of mine who's a gallery owner who didn't want his name mentioned. And he wrote, what goes around comes around. My young daughter, who's very sensitive, who's 14, she goes, Daddy, how could you let somebody write that? And I'm saying, sweetie, I'm a pluralist. That's what he feels. She goes, who wrote it? She goes, well, the truth of the matter is he doesn't want anyone to know who wrote it, because he was so freaked out that he felt it, but he didn't want to have his name. So he only has his one initial on there, which I thought was very funny. But every other one were done by all different people. 3 people added something to the block, and these are the 3 pieces. I didn't mind. This was somebody who works at the Pace Gallery, and what he did is he took my block and cut it into cardboard and then made it look like the city, which I think is really powerful. This is Laura Kruger, who's a curator downtown, and she wrote "Don't Tread on Me," and she put the Statue of Liberty on top. And the third one was a student of mine when she was 7, and I've known her for years. They're major art collectors, and I gave her the piece, and she said, "I want to add a piece of wood." And I said, "Oh, please, Lisa, don't add a piece, because when you see it, you'll tell me if it was okay." And she made it, and she wrote she made it into tefillin. Tefillin are what Jewish, mostly men, but now women use it also. It's what you pray with in the morning, and it has God's name inside of it. And she wrote a very powerful piece about the fact that these were all for people of any faith who wanted to pray and never would be able to pray again. So it was like, whoa. I mean, Philip Lopez, I mean, it's a very diverse group of people that wrote, and it's really, if you get a chance, go to YouTube, go to Facebook, go to Embodied Light, and you can see all 220 people that wrote their narratives. That is the end.